Okay, one sec. Welcome to our hundreds of attendees from all around the world. Just quickly, I wanted to echo what Morgan said about joining the PMA. If you haven't, you need to do so. When I got started in production music 15 years ago, I knew very little about the nuts and bolts of the industry. And the PMA was so valuable in just providing information, networking, and just being a very cool community all around. So composing for production music, am I doing it right? I want to extend a very special welcome to our terrific panelists, Ali Pistoresi, the Senior Director of Production at BMG Production Music, Henry Terepka, composer and producer at 4 Elements Music, Marti Amado Corr, renowned composer and producer, and our 4th panelist, Scott Reinvant, the VP of Production at Warner Chappell, is unfortunately delayed, but he will hopefully be on shortly. So let's dive right in. Ali, it's 2023. Production music has come a long way. It's high quality, it's original, it's creative, and it's fresh. If you had to describe the characteristics of your perfect production music track today, what would it be?
I had to kind of gather a few opinions from my colleagues as well, but the number one thing that we all felt was the most important thing was really just being as authentic as you can be in the music that you're writing. And both, it's a two-sided thing. It's being authentic in that you're not copying someone else's style or taking something musically that's not necessarily intentional. But then a huge part of that is just sonically being the best you can be so that it sounds the most realistic, because we all know that when we're working in the box, it's not always going to work that way. But I think that intentionally trying to make it sound as realistic as possible by choosing the right samples, by adding nuance, by making it not repetitive is the number one thing that we're looking for.
Absolutely. I often get demos from young composers, and so often I say to them, don't try and sound like Danny Elfman or John Williams. Be authentic, be your true self, So the opposite of that question, what is a musical turnoff for you? What is the type of track that you just press the stop button and you never listen to again after sort of 5 seconds in? Like, what should production music composers avoid doing at all costs?
I mean, I think it's the opposite side of that question, which is really, I think the number one thing that you might hear when you first start listening to a track, the first thing that's going to stand out that says that it's not right, it's going to be the instrumentation. So if it's a string section that starts off the piece and it feels just incredibly unrealistic, there's no human nuance there, there's nothing realistic, that's going to be an ear-catching no-no, I would say. To continue going further into the track and give it more of a chance, the next thing that's going to probably knock it out is going to be the repetitive nature. So if you're doing a chord progression and you're not adding any other layers or any additional unique nuance to the track, it's going to catch on. And then of course, if the cadence and the tempo don't go and change and the track can't change, between 3 different sections or 5 different sections and carry its own weight, that's a huge part. So repetitiveness and then the sonic quality are the 2 things that are really going to be massive turnoffs and where someone won't be able to listen to the track within more than 5 or 10 seconds.
Great, thank you. Marti and Henry, switching gears a little bit, production music composing is very different from scoring directly to picture. When you're composing for production music, you're starting with a blank slate. You don't know the many film, TV, and streaming productions that your music is going to be used in the years to come. How do you as a composer stir your creativity and find your muse for your tracks from nothing? How do you keep the music fresh, original, and how do you create music for film and TV when there's no picture in front of you? Let's start with Marti.
Oops, there we go. So there's a couple of things. Even though it might seem like we're starting with a blank slate, there's usually a lot of creative conversation that goes on with the music director or the producer from the production music library with me as a composer producer before I ever sit down to work on music. It's like, well, what are you looking for? What type of sound palette are you looking for? Something that I feel like is hugely important is to establish the emotional tone that we want the music to evoke. That's a first step for me always. Is it supposed to be exciting, inspiring, reflective, thought-provoking, energetic, and then everything kind of flows from there. I do occasionally have artists that pitch concepts for projects to me that I will then bring in to collaborate with. I do a lot of vocal pop song types of projects with younger artists, and I'm more in the background co-writing and arranging, producing. But I actually find it really inspiring to collaborate both with the music directors on the library side, with the artists, with the musicians. And sometimes I do listen to references, other types of music, not so much to like, wow, I want to sound like this, but more as an inspiration, like just as an example. I watched a 1960s British television show called Sandbaggers, and it had a really interesting, unique 1960s sounding theme. And there were a couple sonic elements in that like really jumped out at me that just happened to work for a symphonic metal project I was working on. So just one example.
Very cool. It's actually amazing where the inspiration comes from sometimes. It comes when you're least expecting it. You've got to be open to it, right?
For sure.
Henry, well, what's your take on that question? How do you write music for film and TV when there's no picture in front of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. First off, thanks so much, Morgan and Alan and my fellow panelists. Really happy to be here and honored to be amongst these luminaries in our field. Yeah, that question of like inspiration, how do you get going writing a piece of production music? So just to share a little bit about where I'm coming from in my response to this question, I've worked with the production music library 4 Elements Music since we founded about 12 or 13 years ago. We started working, I was a composer's assistant when we founded, and our client base at the time was nonfiction, news magazines, documentaries, unscripted television, working with clients, especially TV clients who are trying to put together a story in a very quick amount of time. Maybe it's going to air that night. And so they're looking for pieces of music that they're accessing with language, with search terms like mysterious or happy. And then they're listening to a bunch of cues, trying to choose which one is going to complement their story best. So a lot of the time I'll start with that sort of a broad idea of happy or mysterious, or perhaps a particular style like funk music is what's called for. And that's either based on a brief that I've received from a music library that I have a relationship with, or it's coming from my own sense of what I'm good at. Maybe I've done previous work with production music libraries, and I'm noticing that I've had a lot of placement work creating dark underscore, or maybe I've just noticed as a singer-songwriter that people respond to my sad songs. So maybe that's a good target. So those are some ways that I decide what to write. I might also have a new piece of gear that I'm excited to work with. And then in terms of how I actually get to work to create the piece of music itself, there's kind of 2 ways I might proceed. I might lay down a rhythm or a chord pattern and then respond to it. Or I might just sit quietly for a couple minutes and try to imagine a story, imagine a film or TV show and try to imagine the music that accompanies it. And so that second strategy, where I sort of sit quietly for a minute and try to think about what am I trying to communicate, I often find I get a more focused result in the end that'll allow me to create a piece of music that will closely match the search term, like mysterious or happy, that caused the client to find the track in the first place.
Great. Fantastic. A quick question, Marti and Henry. There's been a lot of discussion on some of the Facebook groups recently. How long do you take on a track for production music? It seems to vary anywhere from like an hour or two to like weeks for people. How long does it take you, Marti, and how long does it take you, Henry, to do one track?
It varies tremendously, and it is somewhat dependent on the genre. So I do some solo writing. I do instrumental cues. I'm kind of known for doing humorous, quirky instrumental cues and poignant kind of heartland music. But then I also do vintage genres like gypsy swing and vintage jazz with live players, something like that. And I also do pop songs with an EDM drum programmer and a vocal artist who writes melodies. So obviously an instrumental cue that's mostly virtual samples, couple live instruments, is going to be a lot quicker to knock out than a vintage jazz piece with lead vocal, lyrics, melody, backing vocals, live rhythm section, live string section, live horn section. I mean, there's tons of labor hours that goes into something like that. So it's kind of genre determined for me. And also if I have a co-writer, that can divide the workload as well.
Fantastic. So we've just had word from the wonderful Morgan that unfortunately Scott from Warner was delayed today. Luckily, we have Aaron Gant, who is the SVP of production at Warner Chappell, is on with us now. So welcome, Aaron. Very happy to have you here. And going to dive, fantastic. Going to dive right in with a question for you. At the end of the day, a lot of production music gets edited. In my prior catalog, we once did a detailed analysis of BMAT data, and we figured out that the average use of a production music track is about 20 seconds long. And the tracks in our catalog were generally 1.5 to 2 minutes long, which I think is the ballpark that most catalogs are asking for. So the music clearly has to be editable. What do you like to see in terms of hit points and tracks that are easily edited? Is there a certain structure to the music that you like to see in order to make it easily editable? Aaron.
Hey, everybody. So it depends on genre and style. What I tend to see a lot from people or composers is they'll write music for music's sake based on a reference song, which is not the right structure for a TV or film usage. So I will often say to people, if you have an intro, it needs to be very short, 2 bars or less. Have you thought of starting with the chorus? Have you thought of getting to the point more quickly and saving the more elegant, smaller version for a breakdown or a B section? If someone's skipping through a website of 300 results, search results, they're going to click through these quickly. Does your song say what it needs to say in the first 10, 15 seconds? Or is the cool part in the chorus and it's not till 40 seconds in? You need to think about that a little bit. Genre and style, I would always put in 2 or 3 solid edit points where it's clearly visible on the waveform. When the editor pulls up the search and sees a waveform, they can see, oh, look, it grows right there. It stops right there. There's a pause right there. They're going to skip through your track maybe and listen to those sections as opposed to a song that just is a solid waveform. So I would say definitely you got 30 seconds to get their attention. A short little break at 30 seconds is very smart, makes it easy for editors. A couple obvious edit points, false endings are desirable. Short builds, a strong button ending, but very, very often I see these 8-bar intros or these, especially in rock music, it's like they're just copying a rock song and a rock song structure, and that's not as useful for an editor. And then repeated choruses is another thing I see where people, it's like the back half is the same as the front half, and there's no difference. They've even copied and pasted instruments and vocals. It's like, don't even bother. Just, if you're not going to do something different, make it a 90-second piece instead of a 2.5-minute piece that just repeats. Of course, this depends on genre and usage, but I often tell people, turn on the TV, turn on a show, turn on whatever while you're writing and just leave it on mute. And occasionally while you're writing your music, look over. How is it hitting any random picture? You may adjust your tempo by 4 BPM at the end. You may do little things that you didn't think of just because you have a screen with moving pictures on it somewhere in your room. Sorry if that, I don't even know if that answers the question.
Oh, that was great. No, thank you so much. Henry, any further thoughts on that, on editability of cues?
Well, I mean, Aaron, I think you really just nailed it. I think for all the folks on the call, that's I think that's really good advice. Again, just returning to what causes your music to get picked. Aaron kind of highlighted the scenario where you have a client who's trying to choose between potentially dozens, even hundreds of pieces of music that were results that came up based on their search term. Maybe they wanted mysterious rock or something. And so now they're auditioning the first 10 seconds of track after track. And so how are you going to fulfill that brief and also give them a sense of excitement and forward motion? And wow, if I add this piece of music to my story, it's really gonna hit the emotional beat, it's gonna hit the style beat, and it's gonna add value. It's gonna impress my boss. It's gonna have a sense of exciting production because this is production music. So yeah, I think that structuring your sections in groups of 4 and 8 so that you can satisfy the listeners, satisfy the client's expectation of when a transition will occur is similar to, like, if you're at a dance music concert, you want the drop to come when you expect the drop to come. It's very important for those structures to be square because that makes your music editable, which is a real virtue for production music.
Great. Ali, you talked a little bit about just authenticity and needing to feel real instruments in there. You know, this is a perennial question, but I'll ask it. Often production music is made on more limited budgets, and including live instrumentation can be very challenging sometimes. How do you feel about that kind of synth samples versus live instruments? And how do you encourage composers just to kind of balance this in their tracks so that they feel real and they feel, you can kind of feel that live instruments going?
Yeah, I mean, so much has changed, I think, since I've been working in this industry. And I mean, just to preface, I've been on the music supervision side for a theatrical marketing agency before working on the production side. So I have a music supervisor hat on every single time I'm listening to tracks, and still do. And I come from a theatrical side where, you know, at Immediate Music, we would write for a live orchestra to record. And that's just, it's a less frequent occasion at this point. So when it comes to theatrical writing, I think you really have to write with the intention that the music is not going to be recorded live. So it's really important to suss out those string samples, to suss out, you know, everything that's going to make the music sound as authentic as it can be with a really good mix and a really good master. And I think on a smaller scale, less is more. I don't think you have to have a huge production to make something sound authentic and unique. I think if you have, you know, a cello part that you can write and say 1 or 2 other string parts, and then we can go and record with 1 cellist or 1 violinist, that can be the featured instrumentalist that we can really pull out and make the track sound as authentic and live as possible without going into a massive production. So I think that's a really good way to look at things when it comes to either a vocalist or an instrumentalist, anything that can be featured. You can write for that part to be recorded live, and we spend a lot less resources and time and energy going and having the whole thing done. So there's a lot to be said for recording a few small sections, and then also just kind of going with where your strengths are. If you have strengths on the string side, I would say you really amp that up in your writing and you tailor your cues to really focus on the strings and the way that that sounds in the box. Because if they sound amazing and your programming is incredible, that can really make all the difference over even a live track. So that is kind of how I feel. I think we try to balance the costs pretty well. If something is written to be scored, you know, and recorded with like a 50-piece string orchestra, then it's written with that intention. But if it's ultimately not going to be the end product, I think you can definitely achieve a similar result for sync with your writing, as long as you're conscious and intentional of what you want to feature.
Great, thank you. That is very helpful. A question for Ali and Aaron. From our PMA and IPMG, who's our counterpart in Europe, BMAT analyses, we concluded there are literally hundreds of thousands of composers around the world creating production music today. It's become incredibly competitive, and the major labels get literally hundreds of submissions every day. For all of the composers listening today, In terms of pitching their music, what do you look for that is more likely to land new composers a gig? Like, what are the big no-nos? And we had one question in the chat. How many songs do you suggest? And do you stay within that same genre or send different tracks to show versatility? Let's start with Aaron. Just your thoughts on that. Like, what should composers be paying attention to when it comes to labels?
Well, I get pitched a lot from people that say they're good at everything and they can do any style. I have a degree in so and so, and I've rarely ever found that to be true. So stick with the style and genre that is your biggest strength, that you have the most passion for, and that you really enjoy. And that could be anything. I had a guy pitch me his rock project, and it was medium, but he had a master's degree in flamenco guitar. Guess what kind of project we did? It was not a rock project. So we have very specific ways we want to be pitched. I don't want an individual email because we have a team of people to review submissions. So search the website of whoever you're submitting to and find out, is there a composer portal, email address, some specific way people want to be pitched? Find that out. Write a very short email that explains who you are and what you do, and then give them a link to where they can stream your music. If you try to attach an MP3 or even a PDF file of your resume or a photo, a lot of our email filters and systems are going to block that stuff. It's going to get sent to junk. It's going to get sent somewhere to quarantine. We're not going to even see that email. So a streaming link, SoundCloud, someplace where I don't have to download, I don't have to go to Box and download, I don't have to go to Dropbox, but a very simple screen. SoundCloud's probably one of the best ones. I can click through your songs and very quickly listen. And you've titled them well, the genre specific. The SoundCloud link may even be unique to the company you're pitching to. You can put deck for this company, pitches for this person in your link, and be very specific and be short. 5 to 10 songs. If you have 2 or 3 strengths, 4 songs each one, 5 songs each one. Here's examples of, and then be very clear about what you're pitching. Is this a demo that you've written that's available? Is this something that you've already done for somebody else that you can do more of? Is this something you did for a show or someone else that's already being used? Be very specific, because I've had times where I've fallen in love. Like, this is a great track. Like, I did that for Disney. You can't have that. I'm like, oh, well, why'd you send it to me? So be very clear and make it very simple and easy, and just follow the way that person wants to be pitched. Usually, most of our companies are open and vocal about how we want to be pitched.
Great, Aaron, thank you. That was awesome. Ali, anything to add to that in terms of composers pitching? And also, can you tell us a little bit about your process in-house? Like, if you're developing new concepts or you're commissioning new material, how do you go about that? And how can composers make themselves visible for those sort of processes?
Sure. Well, the first part of the question, I agree with Aaron. We have a process in which you can submit music, and we would want one general email that, our team kind of goes through. Another way to look at it from my perspective would be kind of how I sometimes can oscillate on the sales side and creative side as well as production side, and always have, and with the music supervision side. So the best way for me to tap into a new client's get on their radar is really to look at what they've finished and what they've created. So if it's been a series of TV spots or a few trailers, that's usually the best way that I can sell our music to somebody else, is to say, I see that you recently finished this, and here's something similar that we could offer. So in the same regard as a composer, if you're pitching to us, you can easily look and see what's been synced into television, film, or a trailer placement recently, and know if your style aligns with that, and if that's something that you think would be useful to us. So that kind of comparison and reference pointing out can also be helpful. I think just when everyone gets so caught up and busy, you're not always thinking of where something can be used all the time. So the more you can do that research, I think, when pitching, the more easily it might be accepted and seen, or just, just a fresh perspective. So the more perspectives you can provide. Also, just not providing a ton of links and a ton of music, like a short selection, like Aaron said, 5 to 8 songs and really just being authentic. I think the last thing that anybody wants is somebody trying to capitalize on a bunch of different styles just to fit in every pocket of what we can offer, and really just honing on what your skill set is. And that's where I think featuring things that you're really good at and bringing those out can be, not that you shouldn't try different things and try different styles, but really honing on that skill set and developing some of the stronger suits and bringing those out in a unique way. So, and whether it's a solo instrument. And then as far, the second part of your question, Alan, was more focused on how we actually develop a production in-house. So that section is really, I mean, for us as a team, it's very collaborative. We have, weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings all the time, daily meetings with the sales team and the people that are interfacing with clients all the time, as well as the creatives in-house that really know our catalog and know where the holes are. So those meetings really develop kind of an outline of where our needs are, where our holes are. And then the next thing that we do is really start researching and seeing what is landing, what is currently trending in TV spots or in film, in trailers, and just pulling those references. So references are key. I think everybody, that's an obvious thing, but really just being able to stay current on the research and watching media constantly, just really consuming it all the time and really understanding how it's working with sync. So once the references are complete, then it's really kind of, I feel that it's the chemistry at that point with the composer and how they're reading the brief and how they're researching the references and writing to it. And at that point, it's chemistry. And I think when it comes back, there's always going to be notes and we can develop it and hone in, but it's always a collaboration and a fusion of styles. So it always ends up being a pretty unique result at the end. Sometimes it's exactly what you're looking for. Sometimes it's totally different. So perspective is always really important, I think, in developing projects. But as long as you're receptive to notes and able to timely turn things around, which every single person I've worked with is, then it's a really, really good symbiosis and it works really well. So.
Fantastic. This is, great info.
Alan, may I ask one follow-up question?
Can I have one more thing?
Sure.
Ali said something very important. Don't underestimate what she said about be a fan of the media that we're trying to get our music placed into. You may love bands and music and you can know everything about some genre of obscure composer, but if someone says to you, I need something like this TV show, do you instantly know what they're talking about, or do you have to go reference it? You need to be consuming media as part of your job as a composer.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, actually, because often as the composer, I get asked, what's your favorite music? And I don't listen to much music. I just watch a ton of movies and TV shows. That's what I love. So Henry and Marti, what do you do when, as a composer, you get a brief to think outside the box, be a little edgy? I often get that, folks at the start of the process are like, we want something that's a little different, a little edgy, but then often you kind of land up having to return to tried and true formulas. How do you approach a brief that tells you to think outside the box and bring unexpected new sounds? Let's start with Henry.
Cool. Yeah, that's definitely something that we encounter a lot of the time. Many of our clients, especially on the TV side, are working on shows where they're telling the same sort of stories over and over again. Like it's an episodic character, and they need to make the new episode feel a little bit fresh. And then also, as we build our catalog with 4 Elements Music, we're up to about 8,000 tracks now. As we're building our catalog, we're trying to do the same thing to try to get more dark underscore, more inspirational, more pop music that has a twist to it. The idea of like outside the box, there is the box to figure out what's outside the box. Maybe figuring out what's in the box might help. In this context, we're talking about the kind of music that typically would get placed in a TV show with an advertising agent. And some of those boxes are already pretty simplified to start with. The kind of harmony and melody that's used on television is already pretty strictly diatonic, and the emotional language should stay clear. Like Marti said earlier, figuring out the emotional target for your track that's not something to go outside the box on, I would say. But if a client is asking for something outside the box, maybe they're more concerned with how that mood, that predictable, knowable mood, how it's accomplished, what it sounds like. So it's not asking you to get outside your comfort zone as a composer, but it's coming from a client who's looking to accomplish their usual storytelling goals, telling a suspenseful or heartfelt story with a fresh approach or to the sound or presentation. So be constantly experimenting to improve your craft. And so that you can identify what it is, what's the language that they speak, what sounds outside the box to them. If I'm hearing outside the box, maybe I'm thinking a little bit of dissonance, maybe some spatial enhanced use of spatial effects like delay or reverb, or perhaps some non-Western instrumentation, depending on the client. So figuring out what that target is outside the box, what does that mean to the client?
Marti, your thoughts on that? Like, how do you deal with a client who asks for something a little different, a little edgy, a little outside the box?
Well, Henry hit that answer really well, but all I have to add is there's a certain amount of psychology required to determine if what the brief is asking for is actually what the client wants or what they think they want. And sometimes those two things match, and that's great. And sometimes they don't, and that's okay. But it's like part of my job as a composer producer to really dig in and have the conversation and ask the right questions to really pull out what is really wanted. You know, the emotional tone, as everybody has been saying, is kind of the first thing. And if truly something a little unusual or unique is what they want, sometimes it's just kind of putting a twist on something. For an example, for a project one time, we took a traditional acoustic mandolin and this just amazing bluegrass player, but we put it through an electric guitar amp and then through a Leslie unit and just like twisted and flanged and put distortion on this thing. And it was a really interesting, unique sound, but it was articulated and played with like bluegrass licks, and it was super unique. So sometimes that's all it is finding a unique twist on things.
Very cool. Going back to Ali and Scott and Aaron, are there particular genres that you are seeing more demand for currently? Like, what are the sort of trending genres right now? And would you be more likely to hire composers who create certain genres in particular? And also related to this question is, are you more likely to look for instrumental or for vocal tracks these days? Let's start with Ali and then on to Aaron.
I mean, yeah, I would say we're looking for vocal tracks all the time. Even if it's really the instrumental, that's the essence of what you're looking for with the vibe, adding a top line will just give it that much more accessibility for other medias. So just not putting all of your eggs in one basket, I think, is really important when you're approaching a project. And, you know, even if it doesn't necessarily seem like vocals would be necessarily important for that, if there's a way to work it in and write lyrics that are going to be broad and work for media, then I would say it's absolutely worth getting a top liner to do that, because, you know, if at worst you're just using the instrumental, but the more options, the better. So it's just, there's wonderful stuff out there, I think, for music supervisors to use, but there is a definite need for tracks with more vocals, and not even just traditional lyrics, but vocalese, you know, anything unique and interesting you can do on the vocal side is really important. And also authenticity. You know, we're really looking for more visibility for lots of people in this industry. So the more you can work with top liners from, you know, male, female, different regions, obviously different backgrounds, that's really, really important. So yeah, I would say more than anything, the need right now is for authenticity with music. And a lot of that's going to come from the top liner.
And I'm guessing that need for authenticity is going to become even more important with artificial intelligence lurking around, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that is something that cannot touch right now. I know there's some really good things out there, but right now, currently, that is very important to be able to set ourselves apart from that, and very I mean, especially coming from a theatrical marketing background where everything has to be so incredibly unique, never used before, incredibly authentic. That's one area of this industry that's going to be the last to be affected by AI. So I think we need to push through that.
Erin, your response to these questions, are there particular genres you've seen more demand for? And are you generally looking for more instrumental or vocal tracks these days?
Well, first of all, thank goodness AI music is not generating copyrights. So let's all hope that never happens, where an AI can generate a copyrightable piece of music. As far as genres and styles, we have a very broad user base. So I'm trying to, you know, if it's a local TV station, I'm producing different music than I am for a large reality TV show or for a film trailer. Vocal versus non-vocal. Vocals are always great, like Ali said, to bring in that authenticity. Genres and styles. So what used to be called world music, that term has now gone out of favor. We don't use the word world music anymore. We just have individual regional music and being very authentic in that. Have you, as a composer, thought about using a co-writer? Have you thought about reaching out to Colombia or Brazil or Nigeria or someplace and finding writers that maybe need some help with their production, and you can provide their production expertise and co-write with them, and they can provide that authentic vibe for you. More and more, our users are more sophisticated, and they know what they're saying, and they say, I need Puerto Rican reggaeton, and the other guy says, I need Nigerian Afrobeat, and they actually know what they're asking for. You need to be able to provide something very authentic to that. And you may be sitting in your studio in Nebraska and go, how am I going to do Nigerian music? Well, you need to find somebody that you can co-write with and work with. And those are generally going to be up and coming young producers that don't know anything about our business. And you may have to hold their hand and teach them about registration and joining a PRO and stuff like that. But it could be worth it when you approach someone like me or Ali with your music and we go, oh, and you say, hey, I'm producing this so-and-so. This is an authentic person in this country. Our ears are going to perk up and we're going to listen to your track, as opposed to, I live in Kansas and I'm born and raised in a small town and I do Cuban music. It's like, well, do you? Is it great? Maybe it is. But if you say, I got people in Cuba doing music and I work with them, we're going to be more interested in that. So I see more and more, especially Africa. Latin America has been booming for years. It's still growing. But African music has kind of got its moment right now. So pay attention to that. And then just do what you love. Find your passion. Pick your audience, but find your passion.
Very cool. These are great answers from all of you guys. Thank you so much. Thanks
I
to
would
everyone.
say also, may I add something, Alan, to that question as well?
Yeah, Henry, we have so much to cover. I'm actually going to move on to another.
Let's roll. Let's keep rolling.
We're trying to get through so much here, and I really appreciate everyone's questions in the chat. We are going to try and address as much as we can, given our time. So, Henry, actually, a question for you. I wanted to talk deliverables with you. So, with my own Luminary scores catalog, we deliver 6 or 7 stems for each cue, and we also do 15 and 30-second cut downs. Everything is 24-bit, 48K WAV files. What do you generally deliver for each cue? Marti, I want to ask you the same question. And if you're making cut downs, how do you approach that? And what makes for a good cut down? And how do you approach stemming? And what's the optimal amount of stems? That's a lot of questions, but if you guys can try and keep it short and focused, because we have 15 minutes and still lots to get through. Go for it, Henry.
Wow, 15 minutes. Okay, so the deliverables that performance music
No,
requires.
not 15 minutes for you, 15 minutes for the rest of the session. So
yeah, I'll keep it super short. For 4 elements music, we require a full mix, 2 to 4 alt mixes, and usually around 10 stems is what we're looking for. 24, 48. Everything should line up. All the files should line up.
Fantastic. Thank you. Marti, your answer to that question just on deliverables.
Yes, most of my production music clients require a full mix. If it's a vocal song, then a full mix with no vocals and some instrumental lead filling up some of the space where the vocal was, and then at least 1, if not 2, alternate mixes, light or what have you, Some of my clients require 30 edits that we provide. And in stemming, I try to do what makes sense. It usually ends up being around 6 to 8, 9 stems, groupings of things. And it should be pointed out that it is a kind of a big deal now that any percussion or drum or synth loops where the loop is the sample on its own should never be isolated on a stem. They need to be layered with other things. That's necessary. And it's also very much become a no-no to use any sort of thematic sample. I know that's a little bit of a tangent, but where you hit one note and it's a brass lick or a vocal lick that could be considered copyrightable, that's a no-no. And the last thing I'll say is I had a great client point out to me one time, if there's a sound in the track that really sticks out and could be considered intrusive against dialogue, then that sound should always be isolated on its own stem so it can be removed entirely.
Fantastic. Related to this question, one question I often grapple with is loudness and mastering for production music tracks. My catalog is a score catalog, so I try and weave a balance between big dynamic range, which is what I would go for if I was delivering a score for theatrical release, and loudness, as production music tracks are generally auditioned on websites. And a number of folks have said to me that the loudest tracks often cut through the best and get picked for usages. So Marti, what is your approach to this question briefly? And Henry, same question for you.
Sure. So the production music libraries I work for tend to be the bigger ones. They use their own mastering engineers, either in-house or outsource it. One of my clients uses a mastering engineer at Chappell. And so I tend to ultimately leave headroom for the mastering engineer and let them handle that. However, one thing I have been doing is that when I turn in my mixes to the client, I will put a plugin or two on the master bus that emulates mastering and juices up the level so that they can sort of envision what does this sound like in a more of a mastered context. And then once the mix is approved, I can either remove or dramatically reduce the amount of the plugin to leave more headroom for the mastering engineers.
Fantastic. Henry, your response to that question, your thoughts on loudness and mastering for production music tracks?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of an interesting, fun, I'm a mastering engineer. It's kind of an interesting, fun time for mastering, which we're sort of moving away from the loudness wars with volume normalization with streaming platforms. But the short answer is I would say just try to get your track sounding as good as possible relative to commercial recorded music. So that could vary. The level of pop music varies widely these days. But with full frequency tracks, like if you're working in pop rock or hip hop, or even like a hybrid orchestral, something that has a lot of bass and high frequencies, you want to try to get the track as loud as you can without negatively affecting the sound quality, without limiting, taking away from the sound quality of your music. First and foremost, you want to check with the library. They may have a specific level spec that they want you to deliver at. But in the absence of that, just try to make your track sound as loud as it can be without negatively affecting the quality. If you're working in one of those styles like pop rock or hybrid orchestral, you're trying to bring the mid-range to a commercial level. And so on most productions, that's going to mean reducing your bass content a little bit. If your piece doesn't contain drums or bass, it's going to be really easy for you to make it too loud with the limiter as well. These tracks have a so-called acoustic advantage, which is that if you're only trying to fit one guitar into your production, you can make it much louder than any individual instrument would be in a full band production. So for solo piano tracks, for example, use a commercial solo piano recording or music from a soundtrack to get a reference level. You usually end up with some headroom.
Fantastic.
And just as a spec, I would say we are happy to take tracks LUFS levels -20 to -10, depending on the genre. It's fine for us.
Great, thank you. Ali and Aaron, wanted to touch base with you about TikTok. I'm hearing a lot, just that production music is being widely used on TikTok. And obviously in commercial music, it's become a key way of breaking new songs and getting new music out there. when you're assessing tracks, is usability on TikTok becoming more important for you? Starting with Ali and then to Aaron.
Yeah, for the most part, I can sort of speak to this question. We do have someone at BMG that really heads up quite a lot more on the TikTok side of things, but I would say generally for, the US Department and Trailer Film and TV, it's something we're aware of what's trending on TikTok and always checking for that. And our content is available for usability on TikTok. So it's not a massive focus, but it's something that, personally and as a company that we're definitely trying to incorporate. But as far as turning around music for BMG, whether it's usable on TikTok or not, we'll make sure that it is, essentially. Was that answer?
Right, thanks.
Aaron will have a better answer.
I don't know. That's pretty good. There's two different TikTok user bases, and our business is more the business to business side. So we're more working with brands that want to maybe do stuff on TikTok, and making our music available to them to use on TikTok is a manual process right now. We have to whitelist or safe list every time they want to use a track on TikTok, because it doesn't have the kind of blanket channel whitelisting you can do like you can on YouTube. As far as individual users go, yeah, our music's on there right now. There's tons of music on there. It's not easy to find. No music is easy to find on TikTok. And honestly, I'm not producing albums with TikTok in mind. I'm producing albums with different user groups in mind. It may end up on TikTok. It will end up on TikTok, but it's kind of a side note.
Great, thank you. Marti and Henry, I just want to touch base with you a little bit more about mixing for production music. Over the years, I've heard a couple of people say that when you're mixing for production music, the amount of reverb, ambience, delay, EQ that you use may be kind of different to what you would do if you were just producing a pop record destined for radio, because a lot of our music is destined to be heard behind dialogue. Do you mix with that in mind? Do you kind of dodge mid-range frequencies in a way which you wouldn't for mixing a conventional pop record? Let's start with Henry and then Marti.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and that comes up. I think that some folks have different approaches to that, and some libraries would advise you in different ways. To me, that's an arrangement question rather than a mix question. My thoughts on this are essentially that you're trying to go for a balanced frequency presentation, so that if you switch over to a commercial piece of music, whether it's from a soundtrack or artist music, that there's no change in the sound, that there's no sort of your ears don't have to readjust to a different way of EQing the overall 2-track. But that said, there are certainly some instrumentation choices and arrangement choices that work really well for placing your music under copy. Certainly thinking about phrasing of lead interests, so that there might be a 2-note, 3-note melody, and then a gap for a few beats for copy to step forward. Sometimes we conceive of, and our library maybe has a little bit more of a focus on lead interest compared to some other libraries, but we often think about, like, here's the lead interest from the piece of music, and then here's a little piece of copy that talks, and then there's a back and forth between the two. So in that same way, mix-wise, establishing a foreground and background can be particularly useful. When a track is, I certainly, in regards to the opening of this question, when a track is really quiet, under copy, in a usage scenario, like on television or something, because it's so low, it tends to make reverb sound like there's less reverb than there would be if you had the track cranked, listening at a pleasure listening volume. And a lot of the time, a sense of expanded atmosphere works well with the client's usage, especially if it's a psychological or emotional cue. So I would say that you can maybe tend towards a touch more reverb than you might for some other kinds of musics, but in general, in terms of mix presentation, try to make it sound like the most joyful music in that genre or in that world, and you should do great.
Great, thank you. Marti, your thoughts on that question? Anything special for production music mixing?
completely agree with Henry on that one. I try to be true to the music and trust my ears and trust my gut. If the music calls for being really wet and ambient, do that. If it calls for being more dry and sparse, do that. Unless the client has specifically requested that everything be super wet or super dry. There are just a handful of clients that have super particular requests in terms of emphasizing or not emphasizing certain frequencies. Not all of them, some of them do, some of them don't. And then it's just a matter of accommodating and being very mindful of those requests. And the last thing I want to say is whenever possible, I hire a mixer who's just a mixer. And he's been mixing for 25 years and we've been mixing side by side for almost that long. And my mixes rarely get kicked back. He is golden. And it's like, you know, I actively participate, but I also know my limitations.
Yeah, Marty, I totally agree with you. Whenever I can, I get a mixer to do my stuff, and I trust my mixer so deeply, and he knows exactly what to do with my stuff. You know, it's a very worthwhile investment always. Panelists, you've all been really terrific and such a fountain of knowledge. Many, many thanks. We have a couple minutes left, and I just wanted to finish off talking a bit about just collaboration. You know, any type of music creation for commercial purposes is a collaboration, most notably in film and TV. And can each of you speak a little to how collaboration with others is a key part of what you do and how you handle those collaborations? And who are your key collaborators? We have about a minute for each of you. So let's do Ali, Aaron, Henry, and then Marti. Many thanks. Starting with Ali.
Sure. I mean, I just wanted to expand on what Aaron said. Collaborating with somebody in another region, when especially we're being requested by a client to produce, say, Nigerian music or Thai music with vocals, that would be a massive collaboration and help on producers at BMG's, you know, part. So that type of collaboration and fusion can just produce endlessly incredible results and just up your value as a composer. And then as far as with the clients, we don't do anything without collaborating with them. So we love getting their ideas, their perspective. And like Marty also mentioned, and Henry, you know, it's just taking their brief and actually sussing out what they actually need, asking the right questions. So it's always a work in progress, but that's our collaboration. I'll toss it to somebody else so they have time.
Okay, Aaron, your thoughts on collaboration?
So for us, that's evolved over the years, but I try to get the composers involved very early in the project brief, the creative brief. I ask them for references. What do you like? What do I like? And we'll make a creative brief together, and then we'll get that turned into a project. I don't like to just create a brief on my own and then go out and find the right composer that fits everything I did. I don't, because every composer will say, oh yeah, I just want the work. But are they really invested in that project or just want a paycheck? I don't need that anymore. I've done that for 30 years. I need people that are honestly invested and we're going to give me the hours and time. And I understand the limitations. I understand the budget constraints, but bring a little passion and creativity to and recognize the problems we have trying to get your music placed and the incredibly competitive market we're in, and let's all work together and make something great. And it'll last for years. It'll be around for years if we do it right.
I think it is just so wonderful that a recurring theme of today's panel has really been about authenticity and passion, and that's so great because that's what music is about at the end of the day. Henry, a little bit just on collaboration from your side, and Marti as well, please.
Yeah, I love what Ali and Aaron said. This work is, this part of the business is really about collaboration and about communication, I think. It's about you're trying to help your clients tell their stories, and ultimately you're collaborators in the client's work. And I think to distinguish yourself as a production music library or as a writer of production music, you're working against overcoming this stereotype that's falling away over the years, that production music is like at a lower level than artist music or commercial music. That's simply not the case anymore. It's incredibly competitive. And so the collaboration between the composer and the library which in many cases actually developing the composer, is extremely important as well. And then, yeah, and bringing in co-writers and hired players on your track definitely adds value as well.
Fantastic. Marti, your thoughts on collaboration?
Collaboration is the most fun part of this for me. I would much rather than sit by myself in a room for like 2 weeks with my headphones on, I'm not that person. I'm the person who would rather be in a room with another person, or virtual collaboration being what it is now. It's evolved a lot. Sit with somebody on a FaceTime call or a Zoom call. I've done vocal compositing with clients in another state on Zoom, and we play stuff back and forth and email stuff back and forth. And it just makes it more fun. There's a synergy that really energizes me from that collaborative process. And like the others have said, I think it's so important to figure out quickly what your strengths are and what you love and what you're naturally good at doing, and do that. The things that I suck at, for example, hip hop and EDM drum programming, forget about it. But I have 2 amazing programmer collaborators who love that. They breathe that stuff. So I'm like, you do that part and I will do the other part. And then everybody's doing what their jam is. We all, we put it all together, and that's great, because at the end of the day, if you're trying to do something that's like pulling out your teeth, it's not going to have a lot of joy in it.
For sure. So time to finish up. I hope everyone has enjoyed the panel. I'm sure we could have carried on chatting for at least another hour. Thanks again to our amazing panelists who have given so much expertise today. Audience, please send a big shout out through cyberspace to our panelists, and hope everyone has a great day. Now, all of you composers, you've been procrastinating for an hour and you need to go and write some music right now. Come on, go, all of you.